Mike Carr first joined Toastmasters 25 years ago to help his speaking stay on track, stay on time, and eliminate filler words. At that time, he had one wife, one kid, and very few stories. 25 years later, Mike cannot count the way the Toastmasters has helped him. Today, he still has one wife, but he has 8 children and a myriad of stories. Also many more life lessons. He's a member of Austin Toastmasters and Laughing Matter Toastmasters in Austin, Texas in the United States, and has been blessed to represent his club in a contest or two. When not being a dad, Mike is a money manager in a marketing company and private equity firm, and he speaks frequently to groups on subjects of leadership, determination, and effective communication in a virtual world. Mike is the 2020 World Champion of Public Speaking, where he won the contest at Toastmasters' first virtual stage in history. Mike wants to share with us a 5-series follow-up to support the implementation of what he says today. And it's also to help us in speech contests. So at the very end, Mike will remind us what he wants us to do to get that. Or maybe I will. Mike, have you checked your audio?
I have. I'm assuming you can hear me?
I can hear you, thank you. Mike, have you pinned the timer?
I believe I have, yes.
With a speech entitled Speaking Virtually, please welcome Mike Carr.
Oh, hello, my dear friends. It is wonderful to get to visit you on the island, on those beautiful islands from which my ancestors came. As we've looked at, if you know any Carmacks, then we're probably related. So it is so wonderful to be with you. The other reason it is wonderful to be with you is because I am a fan of the most beautiful game in the world, which was reputedly invented on your islands. And I love crying over the Arsenal. Of course, Chelsea is now knocking at my door because there's a young American who's making waves. Finally, America may play some actual football rather than American football, which is not really football, really throw ball, right? So it is wonderful to be with you. I just have to know in the audience, do you mind putting up one of the reactions? Any Arsenal fans in the group? I'm seeing one. All right, you and I. There's another, or maybe okay, a couple. Well, so we're a group of maybe just 3. Any Chelsea or Blackpool? I really enjoyed Blackpool quite a bit too. Okay, so a couple of others. So we have, some football fans around. I'm in good stead here. So I appreciate your being with me. I'd like to tell you some stories today about virtual speaking, about the path of that. Hopefully that would help you in this medium, because I cannot understand why the entire world is not in Toastmasters right now. This has gone on, as you know, in the entire world for 10 months. This is the way that not only we interact with our businesses and interact with clients and find new clients and continue moving this economy forward in a time whenever we need to adapt, but it is also, and maybe more importantly, the way that we interact with some of our most dear relationships. I have talked to so many grandparents that this is the way they hug their grandchildren these days, that this is the way they stay in touch with brothers and sisters and children. and dear, dear friends. And for some of those relationships have tightened during this time. They actually have become more rich as they've been able to spend more time getting used to this technology and virtually. But for some of them, that relationship is stagnating. And that does not need to happen. That's why I've said a lot. I cannot understand why most of the world is not in Toastmasters right now, because of the practice of building relationship right here. And really, if we think about it, that's exactly what we're doing, isn't it? Whenever we are trying to build an effective speech, whether it's virtually or when we go back in person and we're doing it on those big stages again, and we can move back and forth all over the stage, it still comes down to trying to build a relationship in those 5 to 7 minutes between a speaker and one audience member. Even if it's an audience of 3,000, it's an audience of 3,000 single individuals. And the more we can build that kind of rapport, the more effective we can be as speakers, virtually, in person, hybrid, or otherwise. And so to make that point, I need to take you into the middle of a racing car. It was 2015, and I was at the semifinals of the World Championship of Public Speaking. It was in Las Vegas, Nevada. I had drawn the 10th speaker. Now, any of you who have been in any of these speech contests know that if you're the last one in a slate full of 10 really good speakers, if you can be the last one the judges hear, that is the greatest place to be. I was the last speaker. So I knew I had the advantage to move on anyway, right? So I got on stage, and immediately the first thing I talked about was I was in the part of a racing vehicle. This is how I started out the speech. My wife hit the gas and we took off. Zipped across all over that stage, went on to tell a story about a Christmas time when I had waited until the very last minute on Christmas Eve to buy a present for my wife. And so I just grabbed some catalog at the office. I ordered a necklace. The necklace came. I didn't even open it. I left it in the overnight FedEx envelope, handed it to my wife on Christmas morning. And when she opened it, that's when I found out that I had ordered her a necklace, a plastic necklace. It was costume jewelry. What was worse was then we went to my mother's house, and my brother-in-law had made a piece of gold jewelry, a necklace for my sister. And so it just looked horrible. The audience laughed, they cried a little bit. I was the last speaker. Did I mention I was the last speaker? The opportunity for me to move forward to the World Championship of Public Speaking was right there. And they announced third place. It wasn't me. Second place. It wasn't me. I thought, oh my goodness, first place. It wasn't me. I didn't even place. What was worse, all these well-meaning people flooded up afterward and said, you were first on my ballot. Now, I would tell you, my dear friends, there will be a time in the future when we all can get back together again, hopefully next year in Nashville, certainly, hopefully the year after that in Paris and beyond. And you will hear a semifinal speech that you are certain won, and it doesn't win, or it doesn't even place. And you are so nice to say to that person, you were first on my ballot, but there's something in that moment that just makes us fall apart. I didn't even place. I went back to my hotel room and I thought, what do I do now? I was in New York in 1990. It would have been 2007. I was sitting around a large table with a lot of my colleagues. We had all been working for the same global financial firm, and we had worked for the last 18 months just to do what we could do to keep that financial firm afloat. As company after company around the world went under, Lehman Brothers disappeared, Bear Stearns disappeared, Merrill Lynch almost disappeared and became part of Bank of America. There were lots, as the global financial crisis swept across the globe, all of these companies disappeared, and we had worked tirelessly, not 24/7, but as close to that as a human can, just to keep our global financial firm afloat. And we barely had succeeded, all of us together. But now here we were sitting at this table, and senior management came in and told us, you have to meet these astronomical goals or we'll go find someone who will. Everyone knew. We all managed part of that business. Everyone had their resumes out except for me, because I had just moved my family of 8 for the 3rd time in 5 years. I could not pick up and move them again. If I did, I would probably be moving on by myself. My marriage probably would not handle that. A few of my kids didn't handle the moves very well. And so as I sat there and all of us drank a little too much and laughed a little too hard, I knew everyone had their resumes out, but I was stuck. So I wandered back to my hotel room and I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, how did I get to this place where I have no options? It's interesting. There's some Nobel Prize winning work by a Nobel laureate named Daniel Kahneman. And what Kahneman talks about is there are 2 ways of thinking fast and thinking slow. In fact, that is the name of his book, and I would recommend it highly. It is a meaty, deep dive, but it is probably the best book I've ever read. It takes a while to get through, but it talks about the way that we as humans make decisions, and we as humans, the way we process our world. And if you think about an audience that you're speaking to, that's what you want to get inside their head, isn't it? You want to see how they process the world so you can get in the flow of that and you can make a connection so they are much more open to hearing the point that you really want them to hear, something that will change their lives, something that will improve the world, something that will draw us together as a human family a little bit more. And what Daniel Kahneman says in that book is that it is when we become fearful that the energy in the blood races away from the newer parts of our brain back into the amygdala, one of the oldest parts of our brain. It's also called the lizard brain. And that is the piece of our brain that hundreds and thousands of years ago kept us alive. That when we saw a stranger come up over the hill, those who fought first survived and were able to pass their DNA on. And so we have hardwired in us, whenever there's a fear response, we immediately, our creativity leaves us and we move to survival. But if we can just lay back and relax, convince our brains that we don't have to think fast, we can think more slowly, convince our brains that it doesn't need to be afraid, all of a sudden the creativity can fill the newer parts of our brains and we come up with unique, creative, bonding solutions. So what does that have to do with me staring at myself in the mirror in New York? In that meeting, I was full of fear. I felt stuck. In that meeting in New York, I didn't feel like I could put my resume out. I was stuck in that one place. And I remembered this teaching and I looked into the mirror and I said 2 words that made all the difference. Actually 3 words, sorry, it's hard to count on a Saturday morning when I've just flown virtually to England. 3 words: I give up. Now, if I could see all of you, I see one reaction that looks like this. You look like I just told you that Santa Claus doesn't exist. Because we never say that in our Western culture, do we? We're told to never, 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 never give up. In fact, one of my favorite quotes, I believe, was from Winston Churchill that said, never, 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 never give up. We're told, it's drilled into us, we never give up, right? But in that moment in New York, I gave up, and an interesting thing happened. I went into meetings the next day, and all of a sudden, the drivel that I'd heard of senior managers trying to force, it sounded like forcing us to go do something that was outside of our control, all of a sudden the next day sounded like really good, inspired ideas. And some creative solutions started happening. I went back to my office and we sat down with our leadership team and we said, let's just get back. Let's forget the big, hairy, audacious goal, because the big, hairy, audacious goal is scaring us to death. So if it were just fun, the reasons that we came into the business in the first place, what would we be doing? And all of a sudden we started coming up with all these creative solutions, ways to reconnect with clients, ways to help them feel at ease. And our business grew and grew. And at the end of 18 months, we were the #1 office in the whole global financial firm. But that hadn't been the goal, because there had been no goal. We had released the goal because of the fear response it created in the moment. So what does that have to do with speaking in 2015 after losing the semifinals? The discouragement of losing at that level for the second time caused me to say, I just don't want to be in the contest anymore. I don't think this is for me. I don't think I have what Toastmaster judges really are looking for. Maybe I'm just not as good a communicator as some nice people have told me I was at other places. And in my own way, I again gave up and started writing speeches instead for the purpose of connecting with individuals and helping individuals maybe change their lives a little bit for the better. And so the next year when I entered the contest, it was not for the purpose of winning a trophy. It was only for the purpose of seeing how much better this speech that I loved could be. And I went a little ways in the contest and then didn't go any further. I had a conflict, or I lost at division or district, but that was okay because it wasn't about the trophy. And there wasn't this feeling of discouragement. And then the next year, again, it was working on a piece of art, on a speech that could change someone's world. And then the next year I happened to write a speech called Blue. And I gave it to my club, and the club, after I finished, there were people crying and they had laughed and they came up and they hugged me and they said, that really meant something to me. Why don't you do that in a contest? I said, no. I just want to work on speeches that I want to do. But this last year, I knew it was someone else's year. It was someone else's time to win. But I loved that speech, Blue, so I just tried it, and I just knew the contest would improve it. And it ended up taking me to the finals. And then there was a speech that I knew the judges would hate. I knew that they would hate somebody doing this in front of a camera. But again, it was just trying something, because there was not this goal of winning the World Championship of Public Speaking. It was just trying to create a piece of art, a piece of art with a message in it that might possibly help someone somewhere be a little more creative, a little more innovative, a little more brave. And it turned out that the judges happened to like it, and it won. What I want to say to you in this time, and you're very nice. I saw. Is it Lawrence? I've put on my glasses to be able. Lawrence, thank you for clapping. That's very nice of you. But my point is that for some of you, the excitement of winning a trophy that's what drives you, and that's just fine. But increasingly, I'm running into a whole lot of Toastmasters that are telling me, no, Mike, that message was for me because I've done the contest and I've lost and I've gotten discouraged and I just don't want to do that anymore. It hurts. It feels bad. And I think I'm the one to tell you that you can release that. You can give up on that goal because you have a message, every single one of you looking at me right now. And you know who you are. I'm talking to you. You have a message that this world, your community, needs in only the way you can deliver it. And it's not going to be for everybody. And those everybody that it's not for, someday it may be a group of judges and it's not for them. But that's okay. It's not for them. It's for those people in your audience that you're placed here on this earth to make their day and their world better today. And that's the purpose of a contest speech. That's the purpose. And I'm here to tell you that sometimes that speech goes all the way and that speech wins. But there are probably 20 other Toastmasters around the world that could have or should have won the World Championship of Public Speaking this year. They're better than me, and they would be better than me on 19 out of 20 days. But it just happened to work out this way. Now, does it mean that they shouldn't be listened to because they didn't happen to win? I would say no. I think they are for someone, and you likewise are for someone. And so if we're going to be as effective as we can be, then the way I would suggest to you, the way that your magic, the message in between your ribs that the Creator designed and needs to flow out to your fellow humans, I would suggest the most important way that flows out is through stories. No matter where you go, no matter where I go around the world or wherever you look, all cultures have their stories. And yes, they're different. They look at stories, they tell stories differently. Even English speakers, native English speakers, if I were to go and look, I actually Googled this morning, psychology differences in the UK versus America. And there's some wonderful authors. Now, I wish I'd Googled that last week because I could come out and talk a whole lot more about that. But we're even native English speakers, and we view the world somewhat differently. So the stories are different, but somehow the way we are hardwired, the way we either evolved or were created, we all humans attach to stories. And if we can find those universal truths, typically we all love our own kids. We all want to do something in this life. We want to accomplish, we want to grow, we want to laugh. And if we can look at those kinds of stories, that's the best way for teaching or an idea, that magic you have inside you, to flow out and connect with your audience. So I'd like to take a minute and do a little bit of an exercise right now. If all of you would, if you have a pen and paper, or if you have a smartphone, you can type it down. I'll give you a few minutes just to get a pen and paper. And I have to look at my notes. That's why you saw me put my glasses back on. I try to stick contacts in my eyes, but I end up poking myself and it really hurts. So I know the glasses glare. I'll take them off here in a second. but the first question I would, Dinah, I appreciate your laughing at that. That's my attempt at humor. It works in America. I don't know if I don't know what works in the UK. I've got to try stuff. I've got to try stuff. The first question I would ask you is to write down, what is one of your most strongly held beliefs? And if you have time to write 3 to 5, that's even better. Even if you just write one, what's your most strongly held beliefs, or what are some of your most strongly held beliefs? Okay. Secondly, I'd like to ask you, what story have you heard recently or told that made you laugh? Maybe the story that made you laugh the hardest most recently. What's a story that made you cry? And if there was a story that didn't really make you laugh or cry, but really impacted you, really made you feel deeply, would you just jot a note so you'll remember what that is here in just a minute? So let's go back to your most strongly held beliefs. If you look at one of those, what is your most strongly held belief? I'd like to ask you, why is it you believe that? If you think about it, there probably is a story attached to that. So I'd like to ask for a volunteer. Anybody want to share one of their most strongly held beliefs? If you're able to unmute yourself, we have a quick conversation about this. We can do this in real time. I'm not seeing anyone, so I'll wait a few more minutes in case someone wants to.
I'll share mine. Mine's fairness, and I like things to be fair. And if they're not fair, it really upsets me. So I think it may have started with things like food and drinks. When we were little, we always one person had to half the food, like if I was sharing with my sister, and the other person would choose the half. And I'm still rubbish to this day. My husband always says, "You half it," and then he chooses the other half because I never do half. So I like things to be fair. I think that's really important.
That's a great example. So you like things to be fair, particularly around food. Can you think of a time when it was abjectly not fair, either to your benefit or to your peril?
I can remember a story when we were all taking it in turns to buy each other ice creams or chips, and I can remember me not understanding when I was very little the fact that I had to take my turn to pay for the extra things, and I quite happily accepted everybody when I was really little buying for me, and then it suddenly came to my turn, and my mum was saying to me, "And now it's your turn," and I was like, "Well, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend my money." And she was saying to me, "But Claire, that's what fairness is about." And I think it was at that point she said to me, "Fine, you're not in the group anymore." And then suddenly I was out of the group, and that felt really bad. I think I was only about 4 or 5 at the time, but that, to me, suddenly I was ostracized for not being fair. And I think after that, you learn very quickly. Yeah.
Oh, Claire, that's such a great example, because it makes so many great points about stories that are wonderful contest speech stories, or, again, even more importantly, stories that help share the message you're supposed to share with the world that way. But think about that. Fairness is something across cultures, across the world, that is a universally held truth for a whole lot of us. And a lot of times when we were children, there are stories that some of our earliest memories that we attach to warm, wonderful feelings of being safe, feeling heard, being seen. And there are times whenever we have the scales come away from our eyes, when we're realizing at around 4 or 5, so many of us, that we aren't the center of the universe, and we have to share, and we have to be a part of that. So that there's so many wonderful things in that story that, and that's it. I want to speak to everybody about, Claire's example. That's really great. So if you're Claire, what you can do is begin to really write. I would suggest taking like just 15 minutes a day, or even 5 minutes a day, and beginning to write on that. So you know what a strongly held belief is, something you're going to be passionate about. You know one of the stories that builds to one of those strongly held beliefs. And then taking the practice of writing, I would suggest 15 minutes a day, but if it only can be 1 minute a day, 1 minute a day starts a habit, and you start writing, and then memories start coming. It's like, oh yeah, there was this other time when that wasn't fair. There was this time when it hurt me to try to be fair, and you're mining all these great stories that come out, and they're unique to you. They show your personality, but they speak to that universal truth that is commonly held around the world. And that is a great message and a great contest speech, if I may. Claire, I really hope you'll give that as a contest speech, because I really would love to hear that speech now, especially. I'm really interested where that can go, but thank you for sharing. That's a perfect example. So the practice of writing, there's a third. I'm looking at my time because I want to give some time for questions as well. But one other, so writing down what is your most strongly held belief and why, and the story around it. Secondly, listening for stories that we won't probably do an exercise on that. And I'm trying to do more workshops where we spend more time on really stretching out some of these exercises and drawing out stories, because I'm getting asked to do that. It's just a whole lot of fun for me, because I can't do any more contests. So it's fun to help other people do that. But so what's your most strongly held belief? That's the first question, what we just went through. Second, again, is what are stories that within the last year made you laugh the hardest? What are stories that made you cry? What stories made you feel? If you just start asking your brain, the way our brains are designed, they're huge puzzle creating machines. And if we will just begin asking ourselves, ideally out loud once a day, what is a story that makes me laugh? What is a story that makes me cry? What is a story that makes me feel? You will be shocked what kinds of stories all of a sudden your brain lights up for you that you have heard for years, but you didn't recognize the gold that is in it. And you will begin to hear stories everywhere that you can use. But also you could even ask the question, well, what's my version of that story? In my semifinal speech, Blue, we were driving back from a family vacation. My one wife, you may remember, I still have one, she gets motion sick. And so she has to drive. I tell her that she's a control freak, but she doesn't appreciate that. So I stopped telling her that. She was driving, so she drives all the time. So I will read, I will do something else. And I was reading a book by Mark Mason. It's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Bad Word. But in that book, he talks about his experience losing a friend to drowning whenever he was late high school, early college. And all of a sudden, because I'd been asking myself, what are stories that make me feel, cry, laugh, all of a sudden I had all this flood of memories come flowing back to me. My version of that story, I lost a dear friend whenever I was in high school. And I immediately, we got back to the house, I walked in, immediately started writing, and that entire speech came pouring out of my brain through my fingers onto the keyboard. And it has little changed since then. But when we ask ourselves, when we ask out loud our brains that question daily, you will be shocked the kinds of stories that help you get your message out to the world. And then finally, it is looking around for what can, carrying around a notebook or a smartphone where you're saying, what could be funny in this situation? I started asking myself that. Someone challenged me to do that. And so I thought, okay, I'm going on a trip from Austin, Texas to Phoenix, Arizona, about 3-hour plane ride away. Obviously, this was last year or before. And I had my little notebook, and I thought, I'll just see what kinds of funny things I can see in this one trip. I ended up filling 2 pages front and back with items that I never would have recognized as funny, except that I was asking myself, what could be funny about this situation? There was the guy in security who tried to butt in front of the little bitty grandma standing in front of me, and she pulled back and elbowed him right in the chest, and he wasn't expecting it. And he was kind of, if you know the American redneck, he was kind of the American redneck, didn't shave here, big old cap coming through. Grandma, I'm in a hurry. And she elbowed him, and all of a sudden he turned from this big old guy into this little child. Yes, ma'am. So sorry. And then I sat down on the plane beside a guy, and I said, where are you from? He said, I'm from Phoenix. I said, oh, that's great. I love that city. Where are you from? He asked me, where are you from? I said, I'm from Austin, Texas. He said, oh yeah, Austin. I hate that town. And I said, hold that thought. Pulled out my notebook. This is really funny. There were so many things that have gone into all kinds of speeches. So though, if you do those 3 items, the stories that will pour out of you, you will be surprised about. In the interest of time, am going to stop there. I want to answer some questions. I will tell you, I've talked about, I'm wanting to start doing some workshops because, like Claire, your example, I've done a few of those around the world, and people have amazing stories. Just sometimes we don't believe we have amazing stories. And so I'm helping draw that out, but also trying to do more videos on one virtual speaking tip where we can really go deep, or a newsletter. So if you'd like to connect that way, plus I love people, and one of these days I'm going to get over to your district physically. We'll all go see a football game together and drink several pints, and if you drink a pint, or water, and tell stories. But let's connect it's MikeCarrOfficial.com. Right at the top, it lets you put in your name and email, and I'll start sending you a newsletter, or they're all free, or these videos where we talk about virtual speaking tips, or when we start doing workshops, let you know when those are. And if you want to be a part, you can. If not, then don't have to be. So I'd love to connect on all the social medias too. I tend to be a pretty open book and share what a mess I am. So a lot of people tend to laugh at that, and I'm fine with that. So let's connect. But what I'll do here is go to the chat and answer some questions. I don't see any questions. So if anybody wants to wave and ask another, yes, Philip.
Philip.
Or Evelyn. Sorry,
I'm not Philip. I'm trying to be a host.
Okay. Well, you tell me how you want to do it. I don't want to break your process.
Well, I will just announce them if they need to be announced. Philip.
Okay. Mike, just thinking about the earlier question that Claire was dealing with, the strongly held belief. What comes to my mind, and I'm sure to other people as well, is a negative, something that you really hate, like selfishness and so forth. And what I would have answered if Claire rather beat me to it, but I was poised to offer you my belief in supporting the underdog, and it goes with the other side of the coin, which is bullying. So supporting the underdog is one part of the mindset, but the opposite is hating bullying and the abuse of power, which is another form of bullying. So my question to you is this: when we question ourselves, as you suggested, and we come up with a negative view, like I hate selfishness, is that a difficult starting position, or should we try to find the positive other side to it?
Oh, your question, you gave me chills. I think it's such a good question. So I would say, I would answer your question directly. Is starting with a negative a good starting point? Yes. Should I find the positive part of that? I would say no, not at the beginning, because what you're wanting to do is free the creative parts of your mind to run. So I would suggest in your instance, not beginning to put constraints on any of that. You can always adjust it later, but the immediate flood of that emotion, I hate this, grab a pen and paper, pull out a keyboard and just start writing. And if you can just, even if you have just a few minutes, but if you can just write, and it should not sound pretty. It should be full of the negative words. Pour it all out right there on paper. And so then let's jump forward. Let's evolve that very quickly. Is ultimately the speech that you want to create. Audiences are fine with a strong, of course you want to, there's probably a story in there that may have hurt you and is transparent. And I will tell you what my very first mentor told me is, I came up and I gave a speech about rah, and you can do it. And if you believe, you can achieve and see. And he got up and he said, Mike, you're a good speaker, but I'm going to have to beat you up. And he spent his entire evaluation saying, if you do not crack your chest open and show me who you really are, you are wasting my time. And that hurt, but he was right. And so for you, Philip, to mine that story, and if you would be brave and build I would ask you to be brave enough at some point to share what hurt you, because we all have been there, and you build that commonality. Now, audiences are fine with that transparency and with a heavy feeling, as long as we give them something hopeful at the end. And so that's where the positive spin on it goes. It would be in your writing, move to what you learned, what you were teaching, some kind of hope, an upswing at the end. And that's where, and a takeaway, what I can do from hearing your experience to help the world be a better place, help me be a better person. And maybe it is a step-by-step, three things to do to help make sure no other child feels the way you were made to feel. And that's a hopeful a hopeful end, an upswing. It comes through a lot of writing and editing, but at the beginning, I would say start with the strongest emotion and pour it all out. Now I'll ask, did I answer the question you asked?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I hope that's, and feel free to email me. I'd love to delve into that a little bit more, but I think you've got something really important there.
Elizabeth.
Any more questions?
Yes, I've got my hands up.
Oh, Elizabeth, right. I can't see everybody.
I hope you can see me. Okay, and Mike, I'm one of the Arsenal fans. If I'd done, I would have worn my scarf and the outfit, but it's a bit too late. Anyway, my question is this. You mentioned the impact that your mentor had on helping you. Would you like to say a bit more about the role in having a mentor, particularly in cultivating a world-class speaker?
I think it's important for all of us to constantly be growing and learning. And in fact, I'm actually writing something that'll become a blog post and probably a video. I believe that we should all have mentors in every decade, meaning that I'm 53. I should have a mentor that is 13, and one that is 25, and one that is 34, and one that is 45, as well as 67, 75, and 80, 84, because there's life experience and change constantly in perspective that I get from my 13-year-old mentor that I don't get from my 84-year-old mentor, and vice versa. So perspective is so important, and it's rich, and it fills, and it helps those creative centers of the brain flow. Whenever I'm forced to look at the world through the eyes of someone who sees the world differently than I do. And we can speak to a broader audience that way. The times I have stagnated the most, and in my career, I made no progress and actually slipped backward. In my speaking, I slipped backward, is when I began to have a little bit of success and feel like that I was more of a teacher than a student. And and people passed me. And I look back, there's a 10-year period where I look back and I just thought, I've accomplished nothing. I haven't grown. In fact, I slipped back. And it was in those periods, I didn't continue to look for mentors and teaching. And I worked for a United States senator years ago, early as a young man, and his father had been a United States congressman before. And his father, the congressman, told David Boren, who was the senator I worked for, was a Rhodes Scholar, was at Cambridge for a while. Father told son, every single person you meet in your life is superior to you in at least one way. Your job is to go find that one way they're superior to you and to learn from them. And so I saw this Rhodes Scholar, one of the most powerful US senators for 15, 20 years. We would be in a room and he would be talking to the woman who was washing the dishes, listening to her, because he had found the one area where she was superior to him and he was learning from her. He found mentors in everyone. And because of it, he was one of the most accomplished, well-rounded, and most humble individuals I ever met. So mentoring, I think, is a mindset, but it is so vital for our growth. And we just have to keep looking for them. I hope that I could go on and on about that, and I probably need to stop. But again, I hope that addressed at least some of what you were asking. Thank you for the question.
Any other question?
Is it Jerry? I saw Jerry Dunn raise his hand, if that's...
Jerry, are you there?
Yes, I am. You hear me okay?
Yes, Jerry, I can.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mike. I'm sure this is my fault for not listening properly. Can I just check the three things? Core beliefs, stories, and write them down. Is that right? And presumably you'll want to write down the things that are stories that fit with your core beliefs.
Right. I would say if you write down, if you ask yourself, what are three of my most strongly held beliefs? That would be number one. Number two would be, what stories have I heard in the last month to 12 months that made me laugh, cry, or feel deeply? So that's the second question. And the third one would be constantly going through the day asking, what could possibly be funny about this situation? And then writing about all three of those in the evenings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerry.
I've got one quick question.
Tosin.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I really just want to say you touched on something that I feel needs to probably be expanded on a bit. You touched on storytelling and story writing, but do you have any storytelling techniques that will help? Because the crafting is one thing, writing is one thing, but in the speech craft, you have to know how to deliver that as well. Any pointers or anything at all that will help?
Yes, and I would ask you. It's Tosin, right, or
Tosin?
Tosin?
Yeah, Tosin, yeah.
Which is an amazing name, by the way. Mike, there are so many Mike Carrs in this world. My SEO is awful. So I love wonderful names and so thanks for saying hi. So Tosin, I would ask you, go email me, go over to that website, put in your email address, because I think that needs to be workshopped or in a series of videos. But real quickly, I would give you some, I want to give you some quick bullet points here today, so you've got something you can carry away. And I'm stealing this directly from my good friend and fellow World Championship of Public Speaking, David Henderson. If you don't know him, he is one of the most amazing humans that was ever placed on this earth, and is also a Texan, so don't hold that against him, but really, really great guy. I heard him talk about, I was in a training that he gave, and he said, if we go and we watch, think about the movies that really grab you from the beginning and your favorite movies. He said he and his wife, every Friday night, they'll get a movie, they'll watch it, and they'll break it down. Is that good storytelling? Is that bad storytelling? How would we use that in a speech? And he is so right. If you think about, do you ever see Raiders of the Lost Ark, the movie, any of the Raiders of the Lost Ark movies? You did. Okay. So if you think about at the beginning of that movie, all of a sudden, you see these three individuals walking through the forest, and they come across this big face that scares one of them, and they keep going, and they come toward this cave, and the camera pans over, and you see silhouetted right here, this man turns with this fedora, and he pulls it off, and he says something like, I'm going to go in. You're introduced first to Indiana Jones. That's a great story structure, is starting out. And I'll give you a few quick resources. So movies like that, where we jump, you saw me do part of it today, where I jumped right in the middle of, I was standing on a stage in 2015, all of a sudden hopped in the car, and the audience going, what's going on there? We can't let that question go on too long, or it frustrates the audience. But that's one way. I would also encourage you, what is Miller's last name? It's called Story Brand. It's not Bill Miller. But you know that, okay, if you Google Story Brand, Miller, I think is his last name. Yes. Yes. And he has a great story structure where the hero of the story is the audience, and how you do that. What is another way? If you read a book called The Power of Habit by
Charles Duhigg, is it? I think.
Yes, Charles Duhigg, Power of Habit. He uses it. In fact, I tried his structure today, is what I call kind of a cascading V structure, where you start with one story. It doesn't finish, but in the middle of that, you come to a question. It flows into a second story. you come to a question, it flows into a third story that gives the answer. So you go back into the second story, apply the answer and resolve, which then goes back into the first story, apply the answer and resolve. I don't think I'm going to look at the recording of this one. I don't think I liked the way I did it exactly this time, but Duhigg in every single chapter does it masterfully. And so it's a great book and the content is really good. But if you go and just outline the way he writes each chapter, I don't hear anybody speaking like that. And there's a real opportunity to do that. So hopefully that gives you 3 examples. But let's do connect, and I do want to tear all these into bigger workshops.
Yeah, I will. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'm afraid we have to stop the questions there. We could go on for hours, I'm sure. And thank you very much for answering all of these. I would